thank you all very, very much for firstly for coming along, but for so many of you. I recognise so many names in the audience and can see very many friendly faces, because so many of you have actually been part of the production of the Green Spaces model. We've had probably between 50 and 100 people that have helped us produce this, which is what we're going to be talking about today. Let me just start by doing a bit more of an introduction, however, around the Green Space Advisory Board. It began 2 years ago to fill a gap. Ground Control brought together 7 housing associations, and the aim was to try to provide a helping hand to the sector and use our combined knowledge and resources to show best practice, overcome hurdles, and really promote conversations around net zero that outside of properties, so that focus on retrofit isn't at the exclusion of our wider role in creating communities that are healthy, that are safe, and that people want to live in. Now, around that point, it was probably October 2021, so just ahead of COP26 UN climate conference, which was in Glasgow. At that point, we had 3/4 of adults in Great Britain saying that they were worried about the impact of climate change. Now, that should have acted as a clear mandate for us to be doing much more on our environment. Yet over those last 2 years, we've seen concern that Liz Truss's objective when she was Prime Minister was to follow Frederick Hayes' frankly deranged approach in neoliberalism, which was to pursue ecological collapse, effectively, of the planet. We saw Sunak's major U-turn on climate commitments. We've heard claims that climate alarmism is responsible for the cost of living crisis. Frankly, I'm amongst friends in this topic. It's frankly, the world has gone mad. But despite this, we've been hard at work whilst all of this has been going on, developing a model that the idea is that landlords can pick up and follow so that it can help them use green spaces better, both for their communities and for the planet. And I think when we reflect backwards, we learned through COVID that access to green spaces is incredibly important to people. Being locked away as part of the pandemic response, it gave us, I think, a renewed kind of appreciation of being able to get outdoors and spend time in nature. And there's not only practical advantages that we know to using green spaces better to help manage flooding, droughts, heat, but also our own individual physical health and mental well-being. We know that educational attainment's affected, and our ability to fully participate in society is all helped by access to green spaces. It's almost like we need nature, which is what Ground Control live and breathe through their reason for being. So Ground Control have a vision to leave the world in a better place than what we found it. They've sponsored the Green Space Advisory Board from the very beginning. They offer services to over 50,000 commercial properties across the UK. They're carbon neutral business. That's really cool. They are a certified B Corporation, and they have won not 1 but 2 Queen's Awards for Enterprise Innovation. And for those of you that are starting to turn green with envy, it actually gets worse, because their best companies staff survey results are through the roof as well. So they've sponsored the Green Space Advisory Board all the way through the work that we've been doing. They've provided us with technical insights, expert knowledge, and continually challenged our thinking around environmental sustainability. So we owe them huge thanks for leading the way on such an important topic. And of course, I'd like to also extend the thanks to my fellow Green Space Advisory Board members from Clarion, Futures, Home Group, Notting Hill Genesis, Orbit, Peabody, and the newly merged Sovereign Network Group. So this morning, my colleagues are going to take you through the model that we have developed. Our aim was to provide kind of milestones, I guess, in the journey to using green spaces better, so that whatever sort of landlord you are, wherever you are in your work with environmental sustainability, you can pick this up and there will be stuff in there that will be helpful to you. We developed the milestones, first of all, so identified kind of which kind of chapters or milestones that would be really important and key. And then we conducted workshops. And there are so many people across housing, local authorities, environmental charities. There were local enthusiasts, all sorts of other experts that helped us with that. And these people have helped us shape the model. We are incredibly grateful for that. From that extensive consultation, then, we had a huge amount of ideas and insights into what was stopping people from taking action and doing more. Therefore, we're going to start off today with Sophie and Jamie talking about the challenges that we see and the business case for making change. We're then going to move on to engaging communities, which is a centrepiece for the model that Jamie is going to cover. I'm going to ask David to talk through the benchmarking milestone, and because that is then so intertwined with evaluation, we'll get Becky to cover that piece off together. And then we're going to move through the journey to our milestone on creating a plan and implementation, which Richard and Laura are going to talk you through. And then I'll ask Kerry to cover the partnering and funding milestone. I'm going to stop at regular points for questions and answers. So please do think about any questions that you might have for us. I'll just keep moving on so that we've got time. And really important is to just create us some space towards the end, because we've invited Matt Noakes from Ground Control to come and talk to us about biodiversity net gain in new developments as well. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Jamie and Sophie.
Thank you, Ria. Do you want to move on to the next slide, please? Thanks. So just to introduce myself, I'm Sophie Stevens. I'm Head of Environment and Sustainability at Ground Control. Jamie, do you want to briefly introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm the Chief Communities and Sustainability Officer at SNG.
So the first part of the model looks at actually what is the business case for using green spaces well. And many businesses understand that nature and biodiversity is important. And from our own research, we know that leaders, 82% of the leaders that we've spoken to, think that nature is important to themselves personally. Unfortunately, not everyone is bought into it from a business perspective. And with so many competing priorities, how do we obtain that buy-in from social landlords? Well, firstly, we actually need to recognise the size of the nature emergency. We are on the brink of the sixth mass extinction, and if we don't look after our wildlife effectively, that's what's going to happen. And in 2022, the WWF report said that we'd wiped out almost 70% of our wildlife since 1970. So we need to change our trajectory so we don't hit that sixth mass extinction. So we all have a responsibility to play towards that. And nature is what gives us our food, our medicines, our clean water and our air, as well as all the resources we need to operate as a society and as organisations. A lot of businesses talk around the climate emergency, and that is well embedded into a lot of organisations who have carbon reduction plans and climate management plans. However, the climate emergency is actually accelerating the challenges we have around nature. It's destroying our coral reefs. We're seeing massive forest fires which are burning down our forests. But actually, nature can play a massively important part in slowing down the impacts of climate change, and slowing down climate change itself, whether that's from absorbing carbon from the atmosphere or whether it's around creating natural flood defences. So the nature emergency and how we approach nature should not be seen as something additional. It should be totally embedded into the way that we manage our impacts around climate and reducing our carbon emissions. And that's a key part of the business case. Also, on a more practical local level, that link between the environment, that link between climate and nature is a really important one. Whether that's using nature-based solutions to help protect assets through using sustainable drainage systems and to prevent flooding, or whether that is using nature-based solutions to create shaded areas. We've seen temperatures increase, hit well into their 40s this summer. Those temperatures can have a detrimental impact on the most vulnerable people within our properties. So we have a duty to ensure that we can create some cooler environments for them to be in, and nature is a brilliant way of creating that in the outside space, and actually linking the wider health benefits of nature to your business case is a classic way of really being able to get this forward. So as well as being able to create cooler spaces, it can also help to improve cleaner air. If you plant the right plants, then we can create cleaner air. And in urban areas, we're seeing a lot more people suffering from respiratory issues and having challenges with breathing difficulties. So we can use that in order to improve people's health. But as well as their health, it can also help improve people's well-being. And we've seen this during lockdown, and those links between access to green spaces and people's well-being has been well documented since COVID hit. And as well as having that outdoor space, creating and connecting communities is a key part of creating of using green space as well. The whole point of social housing is to help to bring those communities together. So if we can design those green spaces well and bring those communities into the as part of that design process, we can create spaces which can bring those people together, and also create groups off the back of that, whether that's local gardening groups or creating spaces where they can grow their own fruit and vegetables. And again, that can help with the local health and well-being of the residents. So there's a really strong business case for helping the health and well-being of our residents through green spaces. And actually, by creating those community spaces and having that buy-in from the local community will help to also reduce antisocial behaviours, which can often be a real challenge within social housing. But it's actually from a practical planning and business perspective where with green spaces, if used well, can have a real positive impact. Going forward in new developments, there's going to be a requirement to deliver 10% additional biodiversity net gain. Essentially, what that means is whatever was there before, we need to have 10% more habitats, more species, more diversity. And to do that effectively, we need to manage those green spaces well. Again, getting the residents involved, knowing how those green spaces are going to work, where the majority of that biodiversity is going to be reached, to ensure that for the longevity, for the next 10, 20, 30, 50 years, which is a requirement of the biodiversity net gain, that biodiversity is hit within the future, is managed effectively. So without getting the community involved and without having those green spaces managed well, we won't be able to achieve that net gain. And finally, many businesses now are having to report on their impact on nature, whether that's through sustainable reporting standards or through what's coming around the corner, the task force for nature-related financial disclosure, which is a bit of a mouthful. But essentially what it means is that large organisations will need to look at the value of nature to their organisations and the risk it faces should nature be lost, and how they are managing the nature that impacts on their business. So essentially, by building nature into the way we manage risk more broadly, can help reduce the can help have a positive impact on residents' health and well-being, can help with the climate and carbon agenda, and can also help with our planning and reporting. I'm just going to hand over to Jamie now, who's going to look at the challenges that are facing our social landlords.
Thanks, Sophie. And the thing for me, when you hear that list of so many compelling things from Sophie, isn't a question of why should you be doing this, but why on earth shouldn't you be doing it? The kind of those things I think are just so compelling, and from kind of the perspective of the planet, the communities we work in, right down to individual residents, all those impacts. And I guess the elephants in the room that Sophie alluded to are just how challenging the external operating environment is for social landlords at the moment. Inflation has come down, but all that really means is the higher costs, some of which rose well above the headline rate of inflation, are locked in. The below inflation rent rises that happened last year have effectively permanently removed a good chunk of our financial capacity to address some of the challenges. There's a massive focus in broadcast, print and social media on the condition of our homes, on the quality of the services that we're provided, as well as a massively expanded ombudsman service who the government are actively driving people to increase the level of complaints that are going there. That's raising expectations. We've also got raised expectations coming from the Fire Safety Act 2021, the Building Safety Act 2022, the Social Housing Regulation Act 2023, and all the things that were associated with that. Just kind of a very big challenge. But I think that many social landlords are large, probably all are complex, and every single organisation should be capable of focusing on more than one thing at once. We're doing lots of things, and if we want to succeed, if we want to attract and retain the best talent, we need to be looking to the future and harnessing the opportunities that are coming from this adversity and driving improvement fast. It's not enough to kind of, some people who are lingering around the sector can just sort of moaning about how difficult things are. We're here, we need to address the challenges and use those challenges to drive us forward. I think kind of coming back to this fundamentally, the straightforward case is pretty much every social landlord, bar maybe a couple of absolutely tiny ones who don't have any communal green space, will be doing grounds maintenance. And so this toolkit is offering you a roadmap to do it really well, to unlock all those benefits that Sophie talked about for no additional cost. Lots of organisations are focused on environmental, social and governance reporting. And I think at best, that can be a fantastic tool to drive improvement, to focus on the most important things that your organisation does, to tell an authentic story and maximise your social and environmental impact. That can also increase your appeal to current and future talented colleagues. But at worst, it can focus on peripheral activities, usually involving smiling children. I've got nothing against smiling children. Mine probably smile a bit less than average, but those things that don't have any relevance to wider work, and that then can drive resentment in the people in your organisations that are doing the real work. So I'm here to say fundamentally, this toolkit isn't that. Yeah, it's something you're doing already, and it's something that you can do better to greatly increase your impact. As part of the work that went into the toolkit, there was quite a lot of engagement with different landlords, asking them what are the barriers to adopting something like this, and they were distilled into 3 key themes. The first of which was capacity, kind of simply lacking the headspace in the face of all those challenges that I've just talked through. Second is costs, which I think is self-evident. And the third was resources, like thinking in a different way here needed new skills, and the existing skills which are already there within social landlords are stretched. And so this toolkit, as you're going to hear from a range of other talented colleagues who've been involved in it, addresses all 3 of those. But kind of briefly from me, the way that it addresses them, in terms of the capacity, so first of all, I think something of a myth. We can definitely focus on more than one thing at once. But within the toolkit, there's steps set out in milestones of how existing approaches to planning, building partnerships and resident engagement, all of which are things that social landlords are doing anyway, should be good at. If they're not very good at, should be looking at how they can get better. Should be looking at getting better at everything anyway, and how those 3 things and other steps can be used to create excellent green spaces. In terms of costs, there are no extra costs, and you don't need to just take that from me. That Ground Control have developed a green spaces assessment framework, which has looked at a rural, a suburban and an urban typology, and showing that you can plan higher quality green spaces within the same cost as a traditional approach to grounds maintenance. And so that means there's no net increase in service charges or costs absorbed by social landlords. And then thirdly, on resources, as I've said, almost all social landlords will already be doing grounds maintenance and will have to keep on doing so. But by following this model, the resources that are dedicated to it will have a greater impact on residents, communities and the planet. And another key part, and you can hear some more on this later, is about how partnerships can be approached. And the model has a real kind of letters on a piece of rock running through it around how procurement can be used to plug skills gaps and deliver greater value for money. So kind of my summary on this, which I think is there in the top right, is this is a toolkit that can help you and your organisations make green spaces better for the benefit of residents and communities more widely. There will be clear environmental and health benefits accruing from that, and that will multiply across your wider work. Back to you, Ria.
Thank you so much. That was great. Thank you, Sophie and Jamie. And I think when we publish the Green Spaces Model toolkit, which is like, it will be at the end of the week, and we will email all of you that are here that are registered for the webinar with where to find it, but also look on our website and the LinkedIn page, which you found the details here for. You know, we'll make sure that it's all going out there. When you see that, there are 10 in this section about actually kind of building the case and the business case to kind of influence internal stakeholders just as much as kind of anyone else within your organization for, you know, how can we have those conversations and how can we give some focus to making green spaces, you know, doing better with green spaces. There are 10 key steps for how you do that. So kind of Sophie just gave you a whole load of, you know, really kind of impactful reasons to do it. And Jamie asked the question afterwards, you know, why on earth would you not be doing it? There were some really practical things about this is how you build that case to try to influence internal stakeholders as well as others across your organisation. I should have said, actually, there's a Q&A function on the Teams that we're using today. Please do use that for questions. I'm going to give you a bit of time to think about those questions by asking Jamie actually to move on to the engaging with our communities section of the model. This part really is at the heart, is at the kind of the core of the model anyway. So Jamie, if I ask you just to carry on and go through this section, and then I think we'll pause for a little bit and we'll take questions on both of these areas.
Sure. And we've talked a little bit about it before, but actually this community engagement aspect is the bit that made me so keen to be involved initially. And I wanted to be involved at the beginning, but Ria told me we needed somebody who actually knew how to do some of this. So a shout out to my former colleague, Michael Durant, who did a lot of work working on the board. Has now moved on. He's not in the audience, but hopefully you'll see the recording at some point. And then when he left Network, now SNG, I took over partly as the focus was moving on to influencing and embedding this work. Although one of my KPIs that Ria set me, I failed, which was getting the King to write the foreword. So it was coming out on Friday. Spoiler, the King hasn't written the foreword. Don't judge me just on that. So I think there's two key questions there, 1 and 2, which were an initial guide. But the bit that I wanted to focus on, and it's quite small on my screen, hopefully bigger on yours, is the bit on ensuring that residents have a long-term stake. And that's the most important thing for me. So as well as the wider benefits that Sophie talked about, there's something incredibly powerful of people literally taking control of their local environment. And so once they do that, you take control, you can increase confidence. I think agency is a bit too wanky a word, but it kind of basically sums it up in terms of knowing how to have power in your own life and how that can have multiple further benefits in terms of all aspects of your life. And I think as a housing association, for me, that is our purpose of providing a foundation so that the residents can do whatever else they want with their lives. And I think there's also something incredibly powerful in terms of the key way for me of addressing the climate emergency is showing that individual people have power, individual people can take meaningful action, can start to have impact, and how that can snowball. I wanted to reflect on 2 stories that didn't make it into the toolkit and then say a little bit more about it. But in the discussions in SNG, as we've been coming up with our new corporate plan, which is a riveting read and will be launched soon, I'm sure very different from every other housing association plan. But one of our new board members, new in that he wasn't from Sovereign or Network and actually was entirely new to the sector, interestingly chair of our audit and risk committee. But he summarised it, and it was in a really powerful way for me, so I wanted to share that to you, which is a safe and secure home allows people to be the best version of themselves. Once you're the best version of yourself, you can look after your family, and once your family is looked after, you then can go out and actively engage in your community. And so that kind of is the story that I think we should be supporting, and really powerful. And an example of that is a resident of ours in Hackney. who cultivated a wildflower meadow in a bit of scrubland on one of our estates. He didn't ask for permission, he just got on and did it, took great pride in it, and had lots of examples of how other people on the estate were also taking pride in it, respecting it, reduced antisocial behaviour. A lovely story that someone told me of someone throwing rubbish on it and their friend then punching them and telling them to go and pick up the rubbish, and sort of self-reinforcing it. I wanted him to provide some quotes of kind of talking a little bit about that, but I was also quite pleased that he pushed back quite strongly against me and said he didn't want us robbing the idea from him or claiming credit that we'd somehow enabled this, because we didn't. He just got on and did it. And I think that is something that's powerful. And so in some ways it's good that he's not in there, but I'm now claiming a bit of credit retrospectively. But I think there's some stuff in the toolkit of like, that's a fantastic outcome that happened inadvertently, or maybe like because we just weren't managing the area as well as we could have been. But there are some things in the toolkit of how can you find the people that have got the passion and want to do that, want to be involved, and how can you engage them, how can you get their interest and build upon that. And there's some great examples in the guide from the Camden Green Gym, also the Woodhouse Urban Park in South Kilburn, of other examples where landlords have cultivated that, and all of you could support doing that as well. There's also some important stuff in the guide about thinking about different audiences. Absolutely, I think in everything we should be avoiding jargon, and there's probably quite a lot of jargon in sustainability and biodiversity, both of which are words that kind of you don't normally use in sentences. So really thinking about that carefully, thinking about different ways of appealing to people. There's also a case study on Ron Finley, who many of you might be aware is also known as the gangster gardener from South Central LA. So think about the story that you're telling and how you're going to engage with different residents, and there's going to be a range of different demographics of people who will be wanting to use the space. Some of which was in Sophie's introduction in terms of those compelling arguments of why we should be doing it, but also thinking very much about the what's in it for me, for the residents that you're engaging with, and whether that's kind of healthier, more pleasant environments, or production of food, a range of other benefits. There's also kind of a warning line, but a way to manage some of the balancing priorities that you might get, some of which are in relation to cost, where some people might love to have a huge amount of money invested in the space as long as they don't have to pay for it. I think that's probably relatively easy to manage, but maybe, or certainly, I think some social landlords aren't brilliant at managing that message with leaseholders, and maybe this helps with some of that discipline, and I think you might hear some examples of that later. But there's also kind of things about people wanting to use the space for different uses, and so thinking about that very carefully and not blindly shooting into one thing. You want this to be something that helps the community grow together, not create tensions in itself. So that was all I was going to say, and I'll pass back to Ria.
Thanks, Jamie. Thank you. We haven't got any questions in the Q&A box at the moment. I might ask our technical experts just to make sure that it's working. But I had a question, if you don't mind, Jamie, on the resident piece, was if you could maybe just talk about some of the experiences that you've had around some of the challenges perhaps with resident involvement in the use of green spaces, because we've got lots and lots of ideas, haven't we, about actually how we can have community engagement and how we can go out and seek views and different uses of space and something other. But and we've touched on in the toolkit, haven't we, some of those challenges, but maybe if you could just talk us through a little bit some of those practical challenges.
I'm not sure I've got great examples of practical challenges. I think I could have like some great shiny stories with smiling children in them. There might be other colleagues on the call that have got better examples that aren't go through some of the grit of it. Because yeah, like no one's jumping forward.
I can speak to that if you want, Jamie.
Yes,
I think one of the things we found, we've delivered a number of, sorry, I'm Richard Ellis from Peabody, a number of these type of projects in terms of open spaces, and we've learned quite a lot. And one of the things that I think is key is to get the people out who don't normally come out, because they're the ones that maybe have the kids, or maybe are older people and they don't feel it's their place. But actually, if you can structure your engagement to try and encourage them out, you'll get a much better solution, and they will take more ownership, and then you're not having that wasted investment that you're trying to put in, or they're coming up with the ideas that enable them to feel that it's their space, and that's after all what we want to get.
Thanks, Richard. Why don't we move on? Joe. That's fab. Thanks, Joe. Interested in this, always get told if we don't get customers on board from the off, they won't engage with it. Yep, they have to steer the space. But what if they don't want a green space? Yeah, I think, which is really good. What about actually if we do kind of both struggle with their engagement? We have talked the kind of some of our board meetings here about what do we do to help people try to understand the importance of using space in a responsible way from kind of an environmental sustainability piece. Does any of the other board members want to just kind of rehearse some of that?
Could I just come back on Joe's point? I think definitely one of our challenges is, like, some residents would say they'd much rather more parking than more green spaces, and indeed quite a lot of them are actively using the green spaces to add more parking in a way that's definitely not enhancing biodiversity. And without giving an incredibly practical example, there is something about how you create communal ownership, responsibility and sense to it. And so there's an example from Curitiba in Brazil, where they had a real problem with informal settlements on parks, and so them just being taken over and employing more and more park keepers to try and keep people out, putting bigger and bigger fences, which made the space much less appealing. Instead, they then took a different approach and took down all the fences, kind of were clear this is the community space, engaged with people who then took ownership for looking after the park themselves, and the community self-policed and stopped that happening. So it's actually some of the tensions by seeing something as a commonly owned asset that everybody can share in and therefore needs to negotiate on how it's used, is better than it being something that's policed and you just stick some parking tickets on. I think David had a better example though.
Am I unmuted? I can't tell. Yeah, I was just going to say that what we have found is that the vast majority of our customers are pretty much, they don't feel too strongly about green spaces one way or the other. You get a very extreme minority that are very, very engaged, and a very small minority that will use hay fever or other issues like that and try and get councillors involved. Our approach, as much as possible, is to engage multiple times, by letter, by email, by door knocking, and by walking around with a high-vis jacket on the day of the planting, but also to target borders and areas that are not right outside customers' windows, unless during any of that engagement they show an interest and want an area of wildflowers, or what we have found actually resonates quite well is a little half-standard fruit tree, something like that, that's sort of in the area of green space that's outside their window, which they feel more affinity to. They feel a level of ownership over that, even if it is not technically their garden. So that's our approach, which is much more difficult to manage, you can imagine, than just doing a row of whips or wildflowers across the whole embankment or outside every window. But when they engage, we try and meet what they're asking us to do, really.
And we've got two similar questions or kind of comments and points that have come in. Some of those challenges are around actually kind of customers, residents, tenants' expectations of what the aesthetics look like and delivery of services versus biodiversity improvement. The example given, less grass cutting and kind of looking tidy. We spoke about no mow May and, kind of some of the pushback on what looks tidy and what just looks left. Well, I think we've also talked about through some of the kind of production of this, of when you are actually kind of wilding areas, there's a response that comes back from residents saying, are you just not bothering to keep this now tidy? What's happening with my service charges if you're not bothering to pay to kind of for the upkeep around this? And then Lucy has kind of added maybe on top of that about what happens if you've got kind of tenants that don't want you to stop using chemicals because they think that the weeds look messy. So that similar kind of aesthetic piece. Have we got any comments from around that? David, I think we've touched on that with you before, haven't we?
Neat borders. So wildflower areas, try not to have them spilling over onto pavement. So we have a 1 to 2 metre border of close cut grass around any areas of wildflowers. We're still evolving our thinking with that. We've also found with seed mixes, often if you don't ask, you'll get quite a high grade of grass seeds in the mix. So we've gone down the 100% wildflower mix, no grass, with the assumption that we're mostly planting onto scarified or rotivated soil that already has grass within it. Signage is probably the other big one. So even though we send out letters and emails at 3 different intervals and do site walkarounds on 2 different occasions before the first spade goes into the ground, the vast majority of customers are not aware of what we're doing on the day that we rock up. So we leave signs afterwards with a simple message and a QR code which they can scan and find out more about what we're doing. So that's what comes to mind immediately, Ria.
Yeah, thanks. And Colleen has also, because I know this was quite a topic in the workshops when we did this as well, of around, kind of some of these perceptions around overgrowth and concern of kind of rats and ASB and all of that kind of aesthetic bit. So we've had quite a few conversations around this, but equally Colleen's saying pretty much the same as you, David, in that, really trying to involve communities, really trying to communicate to try to make sure that people understand what is the purpose, what is it that we're actually attempting to achieve kind of by using this space.
And we have had an interesting point in Bexley a couple of weeks ago when we were doing our latest round of planting here, which is we had some residents complaining about people on mopeds and e-scooters cutting across green spaces. So, but there's just grass. So we are actually looking at whether whips or standard trees of some description could actually be used as a natural obstacle to stop people whizzing through those green spaces. So could actually be a positive response to that concern. Then again, they could also destroy what you put in as a natural boundary. So that's still something we're experimenting with.
Yeah, that sounds great. Sounds great. David, on that note, can I ask you then to start moving us into the benchmarking section of the model, and also Becky picking up evaluation? I think you're going to take this kind of together, given how intertwined and similar it is.
Yeah, I think I'm going to do the benchmarking slides. I'll introduce myself formally in a moment and then hand over to Becky. And I think, Becky, if you introduce yourself on the evaluation slide, it will probably work better that way. So whoever's the slide master, if you can click that button, don't take it as a reflection. I was thinking about this earlier, that my slide's the only one without a picture on it. That's just because it's so exciting with so much detail to run through, and not a reflection on it besides that. So as Ria said, I'm Dave March. I'm the head of sustainability for Orbit. I run our Orbit Earth program and wider sustainability strategy. We've been working on our biodiversity approach now for about 4 years. I say we, collective, because it was before I even joined Orbit that the first work on this started with the Wildlife Trust. We believe we are one of the first HAs to announce a quantifiable target around biodiversity, something that we call 30 by 30. So that basically means that by 2030, we aim to be managing 30% of all of our existing green spaces in a way which supports nature's recovery. And clearly, benchmarking is absolutely key to us being able to plan the works and demonstrate whether we're meeting that target or not. So bear with me, I've got about 6 or 7 minutes planned. So Becky, there's your warning as well. So benchmarking then can be used to assess the current condition of one green space or all of your green spaces, depending on what you're targeting. It allows you to measure your maintenance costs before you change anything, and the value that green spaces offer to residents. It is very important to ensure you know what you have before you go and create a plan for improving it. And you might not think this, but actually when we've benchmarked a lot of our estates, we've found that in some cases, we don't have to do anything. We already have woodland and scrubland and wildflower areas that we've inherited or that someone has done, as Jamie was saying, a good deed for us and planted in the past. So benchmarking will actually tell you what you don't need to do as well as what you do. If done well, it will then give you a solid starting point from which you can set targets like the 30 by 31 that we have, as well as designing improvements, and as Becky will go through, evaluating later on how you do against those objectives. It should be a key part of your business case, either at a site level or again as part of a corporate strategy. It will allow you to access grants and sustainable finance much more easily. Orbit has recently agreed a sustainability linked loan with Barclays, for example, and our biodiversity target is one of the 2 metrics that Barclays have adopted. There's no way we would have been able to get those cheaper interest rates and that buy-in if we didn't have this benchmark approach. Of course, this also allows us to then build trust with leaders. We're essentially asking them for trust up front, trust that we're not going to anger our customers by changing green spaces in a way which they don't like, and we're going to be spending money up front and then claiming it won't increase service charge later on. By having a solid benchmark, you're in a good place to demonstrate that you meet those criteria after you've made the improvements. So what are your options? Well, if you look at the slide, we as a group have split them into 3 broad areas covering environmental, social and economic. Be sure to consider what your drivers are because they will determine your approach. Consider the scale of your project. Are you really just looking at one site or again your entire portfolio? What data do you have? Who are your stakeholders that are on board with your message? And what other resources can you bring to bear? It's all going to determine how much time and the approach you take in benchmarking your estate or your portfolio. I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes running through each of these before I pass over to Becky. So from an environmental perspective, we consider the variety of wildlife or biodiversity. I know Jamie was saying it's a term which we don't often use in normal lingo, but for now we'll say biodiversity. We also considered other nature-based solutions which might allow us to manage things like flooding and air quality, as Ria mentioned in her introduction. We have, though, mainly focused on biodiversity in this model because we believe that this is a major driver for the changes we want to make, and it's something that residents tell us they really appreciate. To assess wildlife in your estate, you have 2 broad options, either an ecological survey or a habitat condition assessment. Now, the habitat survey looks at the different types of habitat in your area, whether that's grass, woodland, shrub beds, wildflowers, etc. It estimates the area they take up and their quality. These can be completed relatively quickly and with limited expertise, especially these days with apps that allow you to just scan a leaf or a flower and work out what you're dealing with. In contrast, a species survey is likely going to need to be undertaken by a trained ecologist and could be quite time intensive because they may need to go to your estate multiple times over the course of a year to work out everything that you've got. So our recommendation is that for most of you, you would be best off following the habitats approach, especially where you are seeking to improve large, disparate areas of green space across your portfolios. For new builds, as I'm sure Ground Control will go through later on, for new builds or flagship projects where you're targeting biodiversity net gain and more scientific approaches, we would obviously recommend the species approach at that point. As I said before, be sure to consider what data and resources you have available to support your benchmarking journey. Some form of mapping data will be key. Accurate GIS is the best case, but to be fair, you can use any rough map, including Google, to get you started. When assessing biodiversity of your green spaces, do also consider the surrounding area. Biodiversity will be higher where green spaces connect with one another over large areas. So I always look at it, if there's a pristine area of wildflower meadow surrounded by tarmac as far as the eye can see, it might not achieve the same outcomes as if it is linked by green corridors like hedgerows or even areas of grass to a wider mosaic or a wider landscape of green spaces. So this is going to be something to discuss and consider when you're looking at the planning and partnership sections, because you're going to be dealing with land that isn't yours in all likelihood. So at Orbit, we have been developing a habitat condition tool of our own with the Wildlife Trust over the past few years, and we've made this available on our website. Or we will do, got to check with the comms team, but it should be available on our website very, very soon, and will be linked through from the Green Spaces model. You're welcome to use it, you're welcome to adapt it, or you're welcome to look at it and go, that's not for us, we're going to try something else. We'll be updating it over time, and there will be version control, at least in version 2, so that you can see which version you're looking at and what we've changed. So moving on to social, you can see that there are 2 broad areas that we suggest for your consideration: resident feedback, first of all, and social value. Okay. In terms of resident feedback, we're trying to create a baseline for key questions such as how residents use the space, how it may or may not encourage them to be more active, for example, how they rate it, how it makes them feel, and so on. We strongly recommend that you look at what existing customer engagement you may be able to use or adapt to provide this information before you go ahead and create something entirely new. At Orbit, we found that there were already some really good questions in our standard customer surveys that allowed us to take that and run with it. Pick 1 or 2 key bits of feedback which are of most interest to you and what you're trying to achieve. And remember, you're going to have to go and ask these questions again following the improvements to see what impact you have had, good or bad, not necessarily always good. The results of this engagement data may also be used to calculate then the social value, which you can use FACT or a similar database for. The health and well-being benefits that Sophie mentioned earlier is going to be one of the better examples of how you can get social value from improving a green space. This will allow you to forecast an uplift in social value when preparing your plan. And given the nature of our sector and the current focus on social value, I think it's certainly a strong recommendation that where possible you consider this, because it may well expand the number of stakeholders interested and supportive of your project. I mentioned earlier Orbit Sustainability Linked Loan with Barclays. We actually have another with ABN AMRO, and both banks have adopted our social value target as one of their linked metrics, whereas biodiversity was only selected by 1. So finally, if we look at economic, this is nice and short, don't worry, I'm sure I'm nearly at my time allowance by now. When preparing to improve an area green space, you need to understand what the current maintenance requirements are and the subsequent charges to residents. Then when you create your plan, you'll be able to assess what impact the improved areas will have on this. As Jamie mentioned earlier, this model aims to support you all to achieve improvements whilst resulting in no net increase in service charge. We consider this essential to gaining buy-in from our customers. So you need to know what your costs are up front in terms of service charge before you take any action. Later sections, I'm sure, will go into more detail on how you can achieve this. So to summarize, just some of those key tips: be clear on what you're trying to achieve, identify a small number of metrics, maybe 3 or 4, maybe just 1 for each of those 3 areas to create a well-rounded business case. Engage widely, both within and beyond your organisation. Something that we are increasingly interested in but haven't quite cracked yet is how we can get customers involved in the benchmarking, possibly through wildlife surveys and photo competitions, things of that nature. And so with that, I've been talking long enough. I'm going to pass over to you, Becky, if that's okay, to run through evaluation.
Thanks, David. Hi everyone, I am Becky Ritchie. I'm Head of Sustainability at Clarion. Just a little bit of context about Clarion. So as an organisation, we've been working on green spaces projects for some time. And at the moment, we're creating our nature recovery strategy. This is going to bring together all of this amazing work and create practical guidance on green spaces interventions across both new and existing homes, as well as creating key strategic targets for our organisation along the lines of the 30 by 30 that David mentioned. Obviously, we're not going to do exactly the same as you. So I'm just going to do a couple of quick thank yous. Alex, I think you're on the call today. I just wanted to say a huge thank you to you as a founding member of the Green Spaces Advisory Board. So thank you so much, and thanks for passing the baton for me. I've been really happy to be involved in this work. Also, massive thank you, as Ria said, to everybody that was involved in the workshops, particularly the evaluation workshop. Had some really great information from you, and your insights were really invaluable. Sorry. So going to talk a little bit about evaluation. Not going to go on for too long, so just a few minutes from me. So what is evaluation? I'm sure everybody on this call knows what evaluation is, but in the context of green spaces, it's a key part of testing the success of your project. When carried out in a meaningful way, it can create outputs which can be used to further engage stakeholders and prove the case to enable additional funding or further resources to roll out and scale up the approach to improving green spaces within your organisations. Going to quickly run you through the key steps to successful evaluation, which are in the model. Firstly, identify key stakeholders across your organisation. We've just done this at Clarion as part of our strategy work. So these could be people in key roles in sort of estates and housing roles, resident involvement, people that are already working on these projects around green spaces, or just those that are simply passionate about improving spaces for people and nature. This identification of key stakeholders is really, really important, as it will help to gain traction internally and could ultimately unlock the funding that I've mentioned, as well as demonstrating those additional benefits that David mentioned, which might not have previously been considered, such as health and wellbeing improvements for our residents. The next key step is defining when you will evaluate. The model recommends that you do this 3 times during your project: early on, midway through, and once you've implemented plans to determine successes and review learnings. The next key step is to set your evaluation criteria. David's gone through those in a great amount of detail. So those can be covering environmental, social and economic evaluation. There are some really useful monetizations of the savings that can be made around different metrics within the evaluation section of the model. So I'd really urge you to take a look at those and weave those into your criteria and into your plan and your business case. Then finally, consider verification and certification. So looking at using external standards and verification as a means to provide assurance and build confidence on a project and its outcomes. And another key part of evaluation, which is mentioned on the slide, is recommending that you monitor your project at least annually for the first 2 years after an outdoor space is improved, ideally more frequently to ensure issues with maintenance or any negative or positive resident feedback can be responded to and rectified quickly. Remember to continually evaluate other gains targeted, for example, carbon savings, or if you wanted to look at sequestration gains from insetting, social value, impacts on health and wellbeing, and the financials around service charges, which have already been mentioned. So just making sure that you're not increasing service charges for residents. Just wanted to talk about one of the challenges that's often faced. We've already talked about resources, Jamie mentioned earlier. To overcome this potential hurdle around resources to evaluate, you can look at engaging residents or working with your supply chain partners. And upfront, you might want to consider how often you'll measure things and how long this will take to remove some of those barriers to evaluating your projects. And then finally, I'm just going to go back to Clarion again. So just a little bit more context from the work that we're doing. Matt's going to talk about biodiversity net gain later on, but at Clarion, we're currently considering the handover process between new development and the housing association, and what the continuing evaluation of our sites will look like following the introduction of BNG and the requirement to ecologically monitor every 5 years over the 30-year life of the created habitat units. And I think that's it from me. Thanks.
Thanks, Becky. That's and Dave, that was absolutely great. And there's loads and loads of information in there. These two sections, I think, in the model are certainly kind of our most technical, aren't they? And it's been a real challenge, I think, to try to simplify that with, there's lots and lots of content and substance in there, but also make it kind of manageable and not too overwhelming, because there's a huge amount of kind of how the breadth and depth of what you can go into with the benchmarking and evaluation, isn't there? We have included under each of the milestones for the Green Spaces model, we have included a list of kind of almost a library of case studies and tools and resources and things that just acts as a signpost, with links that go off to acts as a signpost for you to kind of dive into a bit more deeper. And I'm loving what is going on in the chat as well, of people just sharing ideas and sharing kind of all of your insights and kind of knowledge and stuff there as well. So that would be great. I'm not sure if the speakers can see the chat, but Sam has asked he'd be interested to hear views or experience on balancing the focus on encouraging customer or community stewardship versus the need to deliver a measured, target-driven outcome for nature / biodiversity. And we've got some likes going on there, so it's a popular question.
One of those likes was by me, Ria. So
well, there you go. We'll go for it then.
Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, go for it.
I mean, I don't have a perfect answer on this because, of course, we're still learning. I think in the first iteration we were probably a bit too purist on the biodiversity side, and so we're starting to rein back on that and be a bit more pragmatic with, getting customers involved, shifting perhaps from I think there was a comment around pure British wildflower seeds further up the chat. So, our 30 by 30 approach, for example, it does prefer native species, but not 100%. So it's a balance. I think, for example, in a hedgerow, as long as we have a moderate proportion of native species, if the rest of the hedge is non-native, that's absolutely fine. So and if customers are taking on areas of green space which they're managing themselves, we might support, maybe even provide some free plug plants of varieties that we would prefer, but we're not going to rip up what they've put there and put something that we prefer. I mentioned earlier the borders point again, that I think customers feel most strongly about the areas right outside their window, but many of us will have large green spaces on the borders, large park areas that maybe customers don't even realise at first glance is part of their estate. So there's that opportunity of shifting some of the more quantifiable aspects to those green spaces a bit further away from customers' premises if they don't show an interest in them. So that's my little download.
And Dave, that's a really important point, I think, that you started off with about that learning piece, isn't it? And we have tried to, I guess, weave all the way through the model that actually, kind of don't aim for perfection and think that it's failed if some stuff doesn't work, because actually we're always learning around this, aren't we? And it's helpful actually to kind of try stuff, fail, learn from that, share around those kind of lessons, and then move on at the same time as actually kind of our broader, more kind of societal understanding and learning will be advancing as well, isn't there? So we've tried to kind of weave in some touch points, haven't we, kind of through the model, which is just look backwards and think about kind of what you've learned and what you might do slightly differently moving forwards. Jamie?
Yeah, just to reinforce that, really, that definitely kind of the ongoing iteration is surely what's interesting. And so David's point about don't be too purist at the beginning, because you're not going to get to the end straight away, must be right. And if you've got a community that really does want to get involved and steward it, then there might be opportunities for them to learn, think about different ways of doing things which will enhance biodiversity, but also the other health impacts that we talked about. I just had a story that I'll be slightly careful with. Like, if you're too purist about biodiversity, we had a building safety scheme. Actually, one of my colleagues is on the call who was involved in it, where the remediation plan needed to take down the green wall on the side of it, as advised by the fire engineer, and the council refused our planning application to do that on biodiversity grounds. I think we've now got over that and are remediating it. But yeah, being too purist in lots of things can not be good.
Great, thanks, Jamie. And Becky, you made a really important point about that handover piece, isn't there? And I think, you know, we've got an awful lot of learning to do and kind of thinking what that process looks like. Because, you know, I think certainly when we talk about this with, you know, various different kind of organizations, it still isn't clear. Some of the longevity kind of obligations and stuff just doesn't feel as though it's fully embedded into kind of the ways that we work and what we do and how we look at things much more, is there? So we can come on to that when Matt picks his area up. Can I move us on then and ask Richard and Laura to pick up the next two chapters or milestones, which is that creating a plan and the implementation then, please.
Hi, Farah, thanks for that. I'll go through the plan and a bit of implementation, and then Laura's going to pick up a sort of real live example of where it's working. So yes, so we've done the business case, we've been engaging with our residents, we've know what we're trying to do around our evaluation and our benchmarking, and then the next thing to do is to create that plan. Data is really important in trying to do this, not only to talk to people, your residents and some customers, but also internally, and making sure that you're getting your internal stakeholders on board, get them on board early, make sure you're talking to the agencies, community groups, any help you can get to create a vision around a plan. That's so key. Make sure it's sort of, and the things that we've learned from trying to work this through, make sure it aligns to your business plan, make sure it gains support internally. If you don't have that internal support, it makes it really difficult when you get to your next budget round and you want to do something. But make sure you consider the costs and resources. Make sure you have the using the principle of net zero, biodiversity net gain, and how all of that impacts on your service delivery and your service charge. So creating a clear vision is really, really important. And you're taking a long-term approach on this. When we're working with residents, we may be putting something in, or we may be co-developing something with our residents, but they're living there. And the open spaces is going to grow, and it's going to develop, and it's going to change over time. So acknowledge that and then try to fit that within your plan. I mean, there will be some quick wins for engagement. There will be smaller things that you could do, maybe putting a wildflower meadow in rather than some of the larger bits, but test them. Don't be afraid to test new approaches. I think that's one of the things that we've learned a lot, is test it. If it doesn't work, fine, but learn from it and then go again. And plan, this is something I fell down with quite recently. Plan the activity seasonally. Don't try and plant trees when you shouldn't be planting trees, or indeed pollarding them when you shouldn't be doing that. Make sure that it's there. But and also, again, I mean, I think the core thing is that engagement and that communication. Constantly communicate what we're trying to do within the plan. And then the other thing I wanted to pick up on around the plan is that bring the maintenance teams in early as well. Bring your grounds maintenance teams in early, because it may be that they've got a contract a bit like the one that we have at the moment, where it says cut the grass 20 times a year. And we're changing that, and we want to bring people along with us. We want to ensure that they understand and buy into what we're trying to do and what the plan. Oh, am I back? Sorry, I disappeared there. And they have ideas and they have plans, and they also probably will need to train some of their staff so that they're not people who are sitting on mowers, but actually are more horticulturalists and actually will work with what we're trying to deliver. So the plan is an initial plan, and we're working that through, but also then keep on thinking about what are the long-term implications of this. And the other thing I'd like to pick up around is again around that co-creation. I know we've spoken about that quite a lot, but it is our resident spaces, and they're the ones who are living in there. We are doing this for biodiversity, for ESG, for making sure that we are adapting with our climate, but they're living there. So bring them along. There will be changes within the plan. Things will flex, things will work, things won't work, but that's a really key thing, to keep communicating, keep working with them, keep learning, and with the support of the maintenance teams and your own teams, you can help improve and then keep on improving it. So it's an iterative process. It's not something that you just sit, you write it, say that's what it is. It develops over time. Okay, I think I probably said enough on that.
We move over to Laura.
Super.
No, I was going to do this one as well. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Should I just pick out a couple of things on this? So obviously implementation, I kind of half spoke within the plan, but within implementation, again, it's being clear on your goals, making sure you're delivering on what we're trying to deliver, and know that these are going to give better health outcomes and better spaces for our residents, which will then create community cohesion. Hopefully we get it right, but be flexible about it, reassess that plan and execute it as well as you can, and then learn from it. I suppose, yeah, what I'm trying to say is it will change over time. Things will go wrong, things will go right, and make sure that you're ready for that and you're flexible. If we're communicating across the business and with our residents, that will help develop and enhance the plans as we go forward. I will stop there. Sorry, Laura. Hand over to you.
Thank you, Richard. So hello, everyone. I'm Head of Sustainability at Notting Hill Genesis, and we're a housing association that owns and manages 68,000 homes in and around London. As Richard said, I'm going to try and bring to life some of the principles of plan making by sharing our experience of trialling nature enhancements across several estates that have real potential to support biodiversity. And I'll probably be repeating and consolidating a lot of what's already been said by my other colleagues on the call. I'll preface this by saying we've done nothing tectonic, and we definitely haven't achieved any sort of scale, but the principles of the model have been really useful in developing some site-specific plans and then our wider strategy and vision. So just to give you some context, enhancing green spaces is a priority area in our sustainability strategy, and as part of this we've committed to trialling nature enhancements in 7 locations. As an organisation, we haven't started out with one overriding target or metric for our green spaces. Instead, we're hoping that pilots will help us better understand the opportunities as well as key priorities for the different communities we're working with across London. Richard talked a lot about the importance of vision in plan making, and we've been lucky enough to work alongside our new placemaking teams to set a vision that will guide our approach to enhancing green spaces. And for us, it was really important that this mission captured resident aspirations that were shared during our sustainability workshops that we held last year. So we've said we want our green spaces to become greener, safer, more accessible, enjoyable for all. And in doing so, we would develop new and enhance existing green infrastructure that supports sustainability and promotes interaction with nature. So following on from this, we've been able to work with the Green Partnership and the design and consultation of our pilot projects, which has been really great. And on one particular site, they've helped us with the creation of a landscape regeneration report that looks at landscape makeup, management, ecology, resident views and insights to give us a holistic understanding of site potential, and enable us to consider those economic, social and environmental outcomes that the stewardship model talks a lot about. And on this particular estate, we've used the landscape regeneration report as a communication tool with residents, and we found that setting out a menu of options has been really useful in drawing out different perspectives and priorities. So for this particular area, we understood concerns about crime were really key in driving decisions about what kind of improvements would work, and we had to ensure any nature enhancements were sensitive to this. So actually part of the challenge, and I know lots of people have alluded to this in terms of resident engagement, is building that consensus and shared understanding of what's going to work. From this, we started to develop landscape action plans and a landscape action plan template that presents recommendations, obviously taking into account all that really valuable resident feedback with indicative costs, methodologies and processes. And we found this to be really useful in taking this whole approach to implementation with all key stakeholders, which is really obviously sort of emphasised throughout the Green Spaces model. And it's enabled us to get the right engagement from our estate management teams and ground maintenance contractors to reinforce and support good stewardship and long-term maintenance. We're still really at the beginning of the sort of journey around this piece, but it's really critical to ensuring future success. The enhancements we're making. Last but not least, I was going to say we're using the action plan to source funding for our social value programme, so it's been really critical in that respect. As I said, I just alluded to before, we're at the beginning of the journey, but actually having a opportunity to pilot a structured approach to enhancing green spaces, taking into account the principles in the model, we hope will help us roll out improvements across other estates with positive outcomes for people and nature. So I will wrap it up there. Maybe back to you, Ria. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you so much both. So we're kind of moving into actually some of the, kind of getting into the doing and some of the challenges there. With each of the sections, each of the milestones that we've got in the model, the section ends with kind of tips to success and challenges to overcome. So we've tried to preempt or use some of the lessons that we have experienced ourselves, but also some of the bits that in the workshops, people were sticking their hands up and saying, but what about this, but what about that, to try to overcome some of those hurdles, and either signposting or suggesting ways that you might kind of overcome some of those kind of details. Can I take one of the questions that's come up in the chat and go to Kerry, and then either Sophie or Matt from a ground control bit? When we formed a Green Space Advisory Board, we wanted representatives from kind of as diverse as we possibly could, with all aspects from kind of rural, urban, north, south, big, small, mature on the journey of environmental sustainability and only just starting. And that's probably quite a good one. Of the things that we wanted is that we've got Kerry from Futures, and Kerry, you've got an in-house delivery model, haven't you? And then of course we've got ground control as a contractor serving the sector as well. And so we always wanted to get kind of different lenses that we were looking through. Andrew in the chat has asked, have any colleagues developed automated robotic or programmed solutions to ground maintenance work that has effectively released maintenance teams up to develop horticultural skills? Kerry, have you got any experiences? And then I might go to ground control for some comments.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Ria. I guess the simple answer to that is no. So we've not, I think we like the human interface. I think what we have done, though, is we've changed some of the way we're doing some of our grounds maintenance. So in the past, we'd have been spraying and glyphosate everywhere and killing everything off and keeping it all nice for our customers, because that's how they like it. But it was also killing other bits and pieces along the way. And so we've recently, for the last year, we've used a steam solution to remove weeds and those kind of bits and pieces. So in simple terms, no. And interestingly, when I spoke to our ground maintenance team about moving to more of the wildflowers, yes, we can do that, but we need more people and more equipment, which seemed like a really interesting thing for us to, well, why would we need more people to do less grass cutting, for example? So, in simple terms, I think that human interaction and understanding the communities in which we work is still really valuable. So I'm not convinced from us and as a size of an organisation with an in-house team that we're likely to be going down the route of trying to roboticize that anytime soon.
Thanks, Kerry. Sophie, can I come to you?
Yeah, sure. I think a short answer again is no. However, we have taken on board some robotics for grass cutting in some of our areas, especially on those estates where there is a need to keep it very short. And we also do quite a bit of work around how we schedule when we've got some pretty swanky apps which help our teams to be able to program the works effectively, and so we can be as efficient as possible, and we can reduce the amount of travelling and use the closer to the works. But using that to free them up to carry out additional training isn't something that we have done. We do we do general training, and we do look to upskill our teams as much as we can, but we've not done that specifically via using robotics. I guess we're in quite a good position in the fact that we have in-house expertise, which Matt can potentially provide some more info on around being able to create those landscapes in the first place for better biodiversity, and do that in a way that aligns with the maintenance schedule. So in some cases there are as a bit of an upfront cost and some additional working hours in order to get those new habitats in place. But going forward, then the maintenance regime will be slightly different and would be reduced, which would then, so it's a case of kind of balancing out the sort of more intense to then have sort of less intense maintenance going forward. But yeah, I mean, as I say, we're lucky we've got in-house expertise and ecologists and landscape architects who can feed and educate our team. I don't know if Matt wants to come in with anything additional on that.
I'd probably just second that for both Kerry and Sophie. Yeah, no, at the moment, but I can see it coming at some point. Like, absolutely, it's the way of the world. I think, as Sophie alluded to there, is absolutely, we're focused on the improvements back office and from a desktop remote perspective that we can do to help drive through efficiencies and stuff through that side. So I think it's only natural that it will come out onto the ground, and we'll be learning from other industry sectors as we go through that whole process and be backing off the back of some of that tech and stuff that might be coming through.
Brilliant, thank you. David, can I come to you with an incredibly difficult question? So I've that's quite all right.
What have you got for me?
Which James has asked in the chat. Say, we understand, of course, that there are much broader benefits with use of outdoor space, and there were, all of the kind of the bit that I went through in the introduction, and Sophie did as well, around kind of the benefits to people as well as planet and some of the other. But the question is, interested to ask, if fully realised, what percentage impact would it likely deliver? So if somebody picked up the Green Space model and followed that, what impact would it likely deliver in terms of carbon emission reduction for our businesses?
So I can't just give you the number 42 kind of comment here. I think the closest I can do is 0.16, which I will explain very briefly. That's a very old carbon sequestration number per tree that you plant if it grows to maturity. That's the only number I have to hand. So if you were planting a woodland, 0.16 would, multiplied by a number of trees, give you a very, very broad estimate over 50 years of what you would be absorbing in CO2. But I don't think that's really the question. It's not really what the model's all about. So the answer is we don't really know. It's dependent on long-term plans, and of course a lot of the carbon would actually need to be sequestered into the soil. It's not the foliage itself, so you'd probably need a professional to come in, and you'd probably have to check your covenants and exactly what your very long-term plans for that land is going to be, because if you plant a tree today, it may not be there in 50 years time. Shrub beds and that kind of thing realistically are not going to sequester that much carbon at all, especially not if you're collecting the leaf detritus, etc., when the leaves fall off in the winter. So it's one of many benefits, but it's going to be very difficult and possibly not the best use of time and budget to try and quantify that at this time.
Thanks, David. And James has followed up, and yeah, completely. I mean, realistically, obviously that's kind of it's one focus, isn't it? It's one lens that kind of, or dimension that we look through. But realistically, I think for kind of the sector that we work in, there probably are, it's the other measures that we would probably find more impactful, more successful, more, kind of valuable for us to be focusing on, because there is such a wide range of benefits, isn't there? Which was always the very, very tricky task that we had in the benchmarking and evaluation conversations, wasn't it? It was the tricky task of going, actually, how do you try to even quantify just such the breadth of just benefits?
If you're interested in this, there's a couple of papers, I've got them somewhere, that have looked at the benefits of trees and larger foliage in terms of shading, which I think it might have been Jamie or possibly yourself, Ria, at the beginning of the session was talking about in terms of the business case. And obviously with climate change, we're likely to see more risk of overheating, particularly in sort of south-facing properties. Trees can be shown to reduce, in research papers, the energy use in terms of cooling. And obviously, once you know that, you could make an estimate of carbon savings that would be far greater than the carbon absorbed into the trees or the soil themselves. It's all quite speculative at the moment, but it's another approach, James, if you want to nerd out on this. If you do, let me know, because I'd love to nerd out on it a bit more too, but probably not now.
Wonderful, thank you. Can we move on? Kerry, can we move on to partnering and funding now, please?
We can. If we can move on to that slide for me, although it's relatively brief, but I do have a picture, David, so I do feel like I'm winning today. I feel a bit of an interloper in this group, and what's interesting to me is we've got sort of over 80 people on the call, and I suspect that you all come from a very varied background of different understanding and knowledge in this area. Well, I come at this from the perspective of I didn't know much about it at all. And to be honest with you, as an organisation, my priorities were very much around the assets that our customers live in. And green space, whilst we had a grounds maintenance team, wasn't a key part of the thing that we were talking about at our executive level. But my session's around sort of partnering and funding, and one of those things is about learning from others. So I went to a great session hosted by Ground Control, in which Tony Juniper spoke, who's the chair of Natural England. And it was at that point I kind of got it. And he talked about, so my problems are our cost of living crisis, food poverty, and a little bit around climate change, but where our customers live. And when Tony made that connection for me between nature and the solutions to some of those problems, so food poverty, where are we growing crops? How are we creating food? What's the cost of fuel? All of those sort of things, and those are my problems, and nature is the solution to that. So suddenly you start to think, oh, maybe I need to be thinking about this. But we're a small housing association based in the Midlands. We've got around 10,000 homes, and some of you might be in a similar boat. And I'm thinking, right, okay, how do we really engage with this? And the simple answer is engage with people that are further along that journey than you. And I suppose, if nothing else, the Green Space Advisory Board is the best example for me of partnering. It's how do you connect with those people that are on similar journeys to you? You've heard some of our colleagues on the board today talk about their examples. Just to be clear, this guide, this roadmap, there's no perfect answer. There'll be lots of questions that you'll get in the chat there. And quite honestly, the simple answer is nobody knows the answer to it. All we can do is share our experiences and what we've learned and the things that haven't gone so well and things that have. And you can then choose to apply that to your own set of circumstances. So when the document comes out, I think that's how I would encourage you to engage with it, is how do I apply this to my set of circumstances? And if I haven't got a clue, well, where do I go? Well, that's probably where I come in terms of this particular section. We ran a workshop, and quite honestly, I really didn't know what we'd find out. I thought we'd probably end up with a bunch of housing associations on a workshop talking about their own lived experience of where they're at on this journey. But we had people from developers and local communities and other groups coming in and bringing a whole raft of information. So we probably all get the principle of partnership, and it's a great way to achieve more through combining resources, skills, and knowledge. The guide takes you through kind of 5 key points, really. The first one is involving experts and communities. So for me, those experts, well, who are the experts? Where do you go? Who are the links? We talked a lot about people today, and for me, the first group of experts are the community. People that live in communities and they understand how it works and what they want from it. And unless you engage with those communities, we've already identified that the success of those are going to be significantly impinged by delivering a solution that isn't wanted. So engaging with customers, community groups, volunteers, the coalition of the willing, find out what people want. involved schools, sports clubs, volunteers, and there was a really broad range of people that are worth connecting with here. The knowledge in your internal teams, you will have people in those communities that will understand how people utilize that community, the bugbears, the piece of land that actually gets used for the Jubilee celebrations that people get moan about because the grass is too long. But can you create an environment where you can help those things flourish? There will be other local experts with understanding of the species, the habitats, what's already there. I suppose local authorities isn't a particular, everyone's going to be thinking about local authorities, but one of the key things for me that came out of this was, for some people, this is not a cost. This is an opportunity. And I think connecting with others and understanding what their needs and wants are, especially around some of the local authority signposting could go on, you can start to create investment in areas rather than a cost burden to you as an organisation. Local nature partnerships, I had no idea about any of these things. And that's an area where I think you can start to identify the potential for people coming together and really delivering sort of skills and knowledge base that you just potentially, certainly in our organisation, our sustainability team is a group of 3 people. Our grounds maintenance team are people that historically have gone out with lawnmowers and cut grass. It's a big jump from that to talk about some of the things that some of my colleagues have been on today. So we recognise where we're on that journey, but that doesn't mean we can't have ambition beyond just cutting grass and leaving that for people. So for me, reaching out to those people, understanding the skills gap that we've got, accessing funding. I didn't actually realise that there'd be people out there that would pay us not to do some of the things we're trying to do. So that for me is a prime example. And there's some links in the guide that take you to areas where you can get grants and what have you. But the final bit for me, I suppose, of this section is really around learning from others. Because as a sector, we're very good in most areas at, I guess, sharing what we've done. It's how we can collaborate in a way that we learn the lessons together. And certainly on the sustainability journey around the built environment, I think as a sector, we've done that very well. I think there's a real opportunity to apply that to this aspect of green. So in simple answer, the best advice for me is reach out. The guide's got some great signposts. I'll talk at the end about the next steps with the guide, and I think we'll come back to that at the end, Ria. But for me, I think this is if I don't know where to go, who do I connect with? And how do I get ahead of the curve so I don't have to sit in an isolated, bewildering, overwhelming state of I have no idea how to tackle this. So that's it from me, Ria.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kerry. And earlier on, I promised Andy Piper that I would come back to a question that he posed earlier on around whether we've got any good examples of local authority and housing association collaboration. David, when you were talking about kind of the green corridors, and I said that I'd come back after the kind of the partnership bit, because actually we have had conversations, haven't we, about how can we just try to marry up and use partnership working to create something that is kind of greater than the sum of its parts, I guess. Have we got any examples? Can anyone think of? I can't see who that is with their hand up.
I think this group is an
yeah,
example.
We've got a couple. Yeah. Laura?
Hi, Ria. Shall I?
Yeah.
Do you want me to talk?
Yeah, go for it. Sorry.
No, that's okay. So, yeah, we've seen the beginnings of, we're at the beginning of forming relationships with a couple of local authorities. So Camden Council actually have been super helpful in terms of introducing us to various people like Parks for London, who are supporting us in the development of our specification for our new landscape contracts. And they've got a really, really good team there and have lots of advice around how to bring in local sort of groups and voluntary organisations to support some of the work we're doing in Camden. So Camden are fantastic and obviously, have parks like Regent's Park and a lot of knowledge. So I think some local authorities are brilliant resources. In Ealing as well, we've had a lot of advice and guidance in terms of the types of enhancements we can make that will support their biodiversity action plan, given that actually a lot of our sites are adjacent to parks or spaces where the council already have plans and are making intervention. So yeah, we're at the beginning of having these conversations, but I would say it's definitely worthwhile pursuing it based on our early experience.
Great, thank you. And Richard?
I was just going to flag up GLA have got a rewilding grant going on at the moment, rewilding London. And then the other thing is slightly different point, but when we were looking at some of our estates about what we could do with biodiversity, one of the good things that what we found helpful was actually look at what provision other areas are, other open spaces and parks are around that space. You don't have to have that space to do everything. If there's a park next door, know that that's there and then see how we can enhance it and create nature corridors and things like that. You don't have to provide everything on that one space.
Really helpful, thank you. And Kerry?
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to kind of not think about the things you do in your own backyard, but we're working very closely with Amber Valley Council at the moment, and their priorities are not about green space. Their priorities are about how do we create a healthy environment for our later living or our older. It's quite an elderly area, and we know that there's a drive around place nowadays, and so but they recognise that as part of the stock transfer, we own a lot of the green space, and so it's how do we drive improvements in health and well-being through the utilisation of our green spaces, and that's created funding opportunities only at grassroots level, but you're trying to align their needs with something, the asset that you have. So I think that for us is a start of a partnership that we are working on.
Brilliant, thank you. And there's also been a couple of examples in the chat as well, people that wanted to pick those up. Matt, can I come to you now? You've waited very patiently as we've gone through kind of all of the bits of the model, and we've asked you specifically to talk about biodiversity net gain in new developments. So kind of actually thinking about, much further upstream of a lot of the things that we've chatted about today, where we've got kind of green spaces, we've already got estate streets, whatever that might look like, but actually kind of at the starting point of those communities that we are building and creating, thinking about the biodiversity net gain there.
Of course. Thank you, Ria. Thank you. So as mentioned, my name is Matt Noakes, Technical Director here at Ground Control, and I lead on our biodiversity and nature recovery services, but supported heavily by our in-house consulting team of ecologists, landscape architects, landscape managers, and our GIS mapping and nature modelling team, which is super important to a lot of some of the stuff we talked about today. Look, I'm going to share with you over the next few minutes just some initial thoughts, as Ria said, and insights on biodiversity net gain in new developments. Look, this experience is based on our experience today. As Kerry said, look, we're all talking about our experiences. This is an evolving market. This is our experience of working in the early voluntary net gain market, delivering on-site net gain, the creation of off-site habitat banks, whilst also helping shape the emerging local nature recovery strategy here in Essex. I hope you can appreciate, look, we haven't got long left of this webinar, and look, this will be a bit of a whistle-stop summary, and we could have a whole webinar, as we have historically, on this entire subject. But look, can I just start by saying, look, what wonderful insight we've had from the rest of those speakers this morning on the Green Space model, and look, how we can harness that power of our green spaces to transform our communities. So like, as Ria said, it's fitting we end the webinar on biodiversity net gain within development, as the approach set out within the model are closely aligned to that within development of new green spaces and placemaking. Much of what I will share now will actually reinforce what you've heard earlier in the webinar. So look, as we know, biodiversity net gain was introduced through the Environmental Act and will be fundamental in helping England meet its target to halt decline of species abundance by 2030. Look, the latest UK State of Nature report that came out a few months ago underlines the UK's status continually as one of the most nature depleted countries in the world. And to bring this to life, 16 species of UK are threatened to extinction. And and this is the alarming one, the distribution of flowering plants has decreased by 54% since 1970. So biodiversity net gain absolutely is an approach to development that leaves biodiversity in a better state than it was before, using habitats as a proxy for measuring biodiversity and its value pre and post developments. Look, I know mandatory net gain has been delayed for a few months in England, and but developers will be required to deliver that 10% net gain from January 2024 onwards when building new housing, industrial, commercial developments. And small sites will come in, still be applicable from April 2024, with N6 coming through, remaining planned for 2025. The Act mandates 10% net gain. However, many local authorities have or are undertaking viability studies to assess the impact of adopting a higher net gain target, and in some cases 20%. And developers will need to be mindful of these variations as they emerge over the coming period. As we've heard from Sophie and Jamie earlier, the case for using green space well is powerful. It provides the opportunity to join the dots between nature recovery and people's well-being, whilst acts hubs for social interactions, recreational activities, and environmental preservation. Placemaking as an approach for new developments, and particularly the housing sector, is the same, with biodiversity net requirements helping to reinforce these principles for the long term, particularly with the obligation to manage for that 30 years, which is the game-changing piece here. So I just want to share with you just 7 key thoughts and pointers as we move forward towards mandatory net gain from January 2021. And I'll just list them out here. Biodiversity net gain awareness, strategic planning and early engagement. Consistency is critical, collaboration is essential, developing an adaptive management approach, engaging with local nature recovery strategies, and what it looks like. So let's kick off straight away with biodiversity net gain awareness. Look, Kerry touched on this earlier, and we know there's a lot of uncertainty around biodiversity net gain, and we're waiting for further stats and guidance to be published by DEFRA. But the goal is keeping abreast of updates, joining webinars such as this one and others, reading the guidance documents, but most importantly, as I think it's been said much today, is that talking to the people, the professionals that are working within the industry, who have been working on voluntary net gain market today. This is a rapidly evolving area, and I think it will take at least the next 12 months to settle down as developers and local planning authorities get to grips with these requirements, what it all means. Look, secondly, strategic planning and early engagement. Taking a strategic approach as part of full planning development over the next 5 years is super important, and we've been working with several customers to really ascertain what are their biodiversity net gain requirements over those coming years. What does it look like? Can it be delivered on site? Or do they need to look on off site? We know that many large developers will potentially be able to achieve it on site, but some of those smaller developers might need to combine it with off site enhancements. Look, if you're looking at off-site, is there an existing land bank available where strategic off-site habitat banks can be created? Or if not, should you be purchasing land to do it yourselves or not? Or should you be going out into the open market to purchase biodiversity units from a registered habitat bank? How do I find opportunities? How do I find brokers who can and carry out such agreements? They're all questions that are emerging and going through as we head towards mandatory net gain. Look, I'm sure many of you are aware, Ground Control has its 296-acre Wildfowl Centre for Environmental Recovery as our showcase for nature recovery, which includes the creation of a strategic off-site bank. Look, we welcome, and as we talk about today about sharing experience in it and learning to date, it's all about that process. And look, we've done a lot of work around not just the planning piece, but actually the creation of habitat banks and what that means, and it just builds off of what we've been talking about this morning around retrofitting sites. On specific development projects, I always encourage early engagement on understanding that ecological baseline and site impacts, so that you've got then time to plan how you can meet those net gain requirements. Look, we prepared a practical developer's guide, which many of you will no doubt have seen historically, that aligns the biodiversity net gain journey to the REBA planner work stage, those 7 development stages from strategic definition all the way through to ongoing management. Look, I know there's a link within the Green Space model, and that will be coming through. So look, have a read, understand that, engage early in the process. Look, moving on. Consistency is critical to the success of B&G. Look, to date, we've seen much disparity in how this has been adopted and presented across the industry. Look, it's welcome that DEFRA Natural England that will be defined templates for all parts of the providing that consistency, and to ensure, and this is the key here, that local planning authorities can easily assess those submitted net gain plans through the planning process. Look, we know there's some challenges around what that looks like as we move forward, and that consistency is super important as we go. But as with any system, the quality of the input is the key to the success of the output, and engaging with trusted and experienced professionals can provide that consistent quality approach, regardless of the templated documents that go in. So it's about talking to the people that understand what they're doing. And that leads me nicely into collaboration is super essential in developing biodiversity net gains, bringing together and utilising those technical skills of ecologists, landscape architects, landscape managers in designing those schemes, alongside the legal, financial, land professionals to support with those transactions is paramount as we move forward. Biodiversity net gain isn't just about an ecologist. This is about a team coming together to drive this forward and stuff. And look, and as in addition, as Becky mentioned earlier, that many organisations are currently looking at that handover process from development to ongoing stewardship. This is either internally if there's development and property teams within the same organisations, or separately if not. Ensuring that handover and transition is efficient and smooth, and necessary management requirements are embedded and understood is super important as we move forward to the success of biodiversity net gain over that 30-year period. And talking about that 30-year period, developing an adaptive management approach is absolutely top of the bill for me. And look, this is where the magic happens and we start to see wildlife return. We talk a good game here, everyone talks a good game, but actually doing the stuff on the ground, whether that's the implementation, the creation, the change of the habitat and the management, is where we start to see it come to life. Look, super critical part of the process. One that I think has taken a back seat to date, whilst the earlier stages of the process have been finalised. I absolutely understand that, but one that we shouldn't forget on. Look, I will reiterate again, and it's been mentioned several times earlier today, engaging with experienced nature-led managers early in that process, as part of that design process, to ensure those schemes are appropriate and deliverable, whilst they adopt an adaptive management approach, to ensure those milestones, those habitat conditions that have been stated and set out within the management plans are met. Look, the stakes are high, and it's about getting it right early doors. And I think that's one of the key bits is engaging land managers early on that one. If there's one takeaway from today, and this is it actually, and this is moving on, I'd strongly recommend engaging. Kerry just mentioned it actually. You mentioned about local nature partnerships, but actually it's engaging with local nature recovery strategies as they emerge over the coming year. These spatial strategies at the local level agree priorities for nature recovery and map areas that could become of potential, particularly importance for biodiversity. Look, understanding these emerging areas and priorities underpins the government's nature recovery ambitions, and will more importantly influence biodiversity net gain. And lastly, what good looks like. Look, we all know what good looks like. And look, in this new nature positive world, it's super important that we collectively continue to share best practice and learnings as we move forward, to ensure that we start to halt the decline in species abundance. Look, as we head towards January 2024, I am super excited at the impact biodiversity net gain can have us alongside other nature recovery initiatives. This is a once-in-a-lifetime game-changing approach. And as the then DEFRA Minister, Trudy Harrison, commented, as you can see in the slide deck, biodiversity net gain will ensure new developments work for both wildlife and people. We will create nature-rich places whilst ensuring communities get the new homes and infrastructure they need. So I'm going to leave you with this thought, and I'm sure there's going to be some comments. Look, we're on a journey. Let's work together to make it a success. And look, please reach out after the webinar if you want to chat. And that's it. Back to you, Ria.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Matt. That was really, really interesting. Darren, I think you've got your hand up. I tried to note in the chat is that I'm unable to unmute you on this version of kind of the public hosting bit of Teams. So please do put, if you've got comments and stuff, please do put it in the chat. What else have we got in the chat? Interested to learn how to register land for habitat management. As an organisation with quite a large amount of land not managed but could be restored for nature, but we need more funding to facilitate managed land for biodiversity. Existing work funded by service charges. Matt, have you got any thoughts on that?
Look, absolutely. If you've got land that can be transformed for nature, then absolutely. Look, the funding piece is always a critical piece, but I think it's looking at what is the baseline there on that site at the moment, and what are the opportunities, because BNG can fund that in the long term, etc., etc. So it certainly is an opportunity there, and I can certainly have a conversation offline about that and carry that one forward, that conversation forward.
Great.
Can you hear me now?
I can, yes.
Okay, right, sorry. Thanks for all the talkers. There's quite a few queries I've got. I've been a tier 1 contractor for the last 14 years and noticed that the specifications that come from the designers don't pick up half your questions and queries that you're raising. So biodiversity is not really planting schemes, flowering plants, and not put in the specification. The maintenance section is poorly written, yeah, so you have to rewrite it yourself. I worked at Elephant and Castle for 4 years on a project there where they had planter beds up on the roofs and the podium decks, and it took about 2 years for the community to get together, and we had many meetings with them of showing them how to plant vegetables, yeah, and finally they took over those areas and then started working more further with the green avenues going through the whole of Southwark, where we put the 1,200 trees in as part of the process for building Elephant Park. That was a massive reward for all the community. But things need to change from, as Matt is saying, from the beginning with the designers. I'm sorry if there's any designers on board, but that's that's my side of things. So thanks for sharing. I could share.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful, Darren. And in actual fact, I think Richard might have alluded to it, but we have tried, and we probably could have. I mean, the procurement section in the model could have been 10 times bigger than what it is. We've tried to keep things kind of as simple as that and the other, but it picks up on your point actually about just thinking about specifications and design and what landlords are going out to the market asking for. We absolutely recognise that just needs to be much, much smarter and reflect kind of the principles that it is that we're attempting to kind of promote. Because, when what effectively we're trying to look at, and this is why we wanted to start with the business case bit, is we're effectively looking at like full-scale systems change. This is not just how can we just use that green space down the road a little bit better. It's people's mindsets, it's procurement, it's engaging with your customers, it's data. It's the entire piece, isn't it? And without wanting to be too overwhelming, therefore, we've attempted to take that into kind of bite-sized chunks to go follow these key steps, and you'll at least be turning that dial a bit, and you'll be making more and more and more improvements. So that we can get to the stage as David was kind of setting out. I mean, I love that Orbit's 30 by 30. It's demonstrable commitment of this is what we're going to do, and we're going to measure ourselves against that. Like, that's awesome, isn't it? Around that. I might just move us on. I'm conscious that we've got only 5 minutes left. I'm going to hand over to Kerry to close things down. Can I just spend 30 seconds though giving some personal thanks to the speakers who over the last 2 years have put in so much hard work and effort, and included in that we've got some colleagues that are not here that I just want to shout out. We've got Alex Willey from Clarion, Ellie Holt from Peabody, Lauren Rose Harper from Peabody, and Michael Durrant who used to be at Network, who have been absolutely instrumental, as well as the speakers that you've heard from today, in all of the work that we've been doing over the past 2 years and the model. A massive thanks to Ground Control for all of the support and supporting everything that we have done on this. Matt indicated things like the developer's guide and things. There's loads of resources on Grand Control's website, and hosted on Grand Control's website is the Green Space Advisory Board website as well. So please do look at that. And then lastly, a big thanks to Kerry, who from this point is going to be taking over as the chair of the Green Space Advisory Board. So I'm going to hand over to Kerry and remind Kerry through this to remind everyone else that the model is out at the end of the week. Thanks, Kerry.
So I'll get that bit done. The model's out at the end of the week. And that way, my brain doesn't go beyond a couple of seconds. It's goldfish brain. But I guess I can't take the baton on without saying a massive, massive thank you to Ground Control for sponsoring and supporting this, but mainly Ria for your drive and energy over the last 2 years to get us to this. I've seen the document, and I just don't think we'd have got the talent of the people around the table to get that output. So I'm really excited when that comes out next week for you all to see that. And it could be a point in time of which that's the piece of work. But I think I have a view is that we talked about partnering and sharing earlier on, that there's an opportunity here for us to do more as a collaborative group within our sector and to share. And so I think what we're looking to do in the new year is to look at how we take this forward and of how it will be best used to us as a sector. So I don't have a clear roadmap and a template for that as yet. But what I do know is if you are engaged and you like the document and you're passionate about doing something, or you just want to freeload on the people that are already doing this stuff, then get involved. The contact details for me will be on the launch. So please get involved. If you're interested and you've got some energy to come to the party with, then please do. But I've found the last 2 years really helpful and informative. And I'm hopeful that we can then take that to the next level and continue it with the good work that everyone else has been doing. I think that's it really from me, really. Are we wrapping up from this point, or are you doing that, or shall I?
Over to you, boss.
Well, I hope this has been really useful. We'd love your feedback and in terms of the model when it comes out next week. So please engage with it. If it hasn't included something that you think it should, if you have got ideas about the next direction, then please feed them all in. I will make sure that we hear those as a board. And if you want to get involved in that, as I said, please get in contact. But thank you for taking the time. It's been a really good session. And I hope you all have a great day.
Bye, everyone.